On a March morning in 1931, a hotel clerk pressed his ear to the door of room 552. For 24 years, no maid had entered, no sunlight had touched the carpet. Inside lived a 93-year-old widow named Ida Mayfield Wood, the celebrated belle of New Orleans, the wife of a congressman, the queen of Lincoln-era Manhattan society. She had not bathed in years. She had not opened a window since William Howard Taft was president. Behind that locked door waited rotted silk gowns, yellowed newspapers stacked to the ceiling, and a fortune nearly $1 million in cash, gold certificates, and diamonds stuffed into oilcloth, mattresses, and an old crackerjack box beneath her bed. But the deepest secret in room 552 was not the money. It was the woman herself, because Ida Mayfield Wood, the Southern aristocrat, the Confederate sympathizer, the friend of presidents, did not exist. And she never had. Before we go further into this story, subscribe to the Gilded Lullabies and tell me in the comments where in the world you are watching from. Stories like this deserve an audience who feels them deeply. Now, back to the darkness, the world she was born into. The Manhattan of 1857 was a city of velvet and coal smoke. Astor Place glittered under gaslight. The brownstones of Madison Square housed the new lords of an industrial empire, men whose fortunes were measured in railroads, in copper, in the human freight of cotton mills. The Civil War was 4 years away. The Gilded Age had not yet been named. But its rules were already being written in the ballrooms of the Fifth Avenue Hotel and the private boxes of the Academy of Music. Into this world walked a 19-year-old girl with auburn hair, a tiny waist, and a southern accent so practiced it sounded inherited. She called herself Ida Mayfield. She claimed her father was Henry Mayfield, a sugar planter in Louisiana, descended from Old English gentry. She claimed her mother was a New Orleans lady of refinement. She arrived in New York City with a single trunk, no chaperone, and a letter she had written to herself. The letter was addressed to Benjamin Wood, then 37 years old, married, a sitting congressman, and the publisher of the New York Daily News, a Democratic paper aligned with the Copperhead wing of the party. Benjamin Wood was the younger brother of Fernando Wood, the 3-term mayor of New York City, the man who in 1861 proposed that Manhattan secede from the Union and declare itself a free city. The Woods were Tammany Hall royalty. They owned newspapers, judges, dockworkers, and the affection of Irish immigrants who voted as their employers told them to. The letter Ida Mayfield wrote to Benjamin Wood was remarkable. She had never met him. She did not know him. She wrote to him as though she were already his confidante. She offered to become his mistress. She wrote, in language documented in court records 70 years later, that she had observed him from afar, that she admired him, and that she wished to enter into a discreet arrangement. She enclosed her address. She enclosed her terms. Benjamin Wood accepted. For the next 10 years, Ida Mayfield lived in a Manhattan apartment paid for by Benjamin Wood, while he remained married to his second wife. She moved through the half-lit world of 19th century, kept women with rare precision. She learned French. She learned the seating order of a society dinner. She studied the cotillions she had never been allowed to attend. She invented an entire family in Louisiana, complete with deceased parents, lost plantations burned in the war, and cousins who never quite arrived for visits. She was 29 years old when Benjamin Wood's wife died in 1867. Within days, the mistress became the wife. The Southern belle, who had never existed, became Mrs. Benjamin Wood of 6th Avenue and 28th Street, hostess to senators and generals. The fade was perfect. It would hold for 64 years. But somewhere beneath the silk, beneath the calling cards, beneath the rehearsed laughter, lived a girl named Ellen Walsh from Malden, Massachusetts, the daughter of an Irish peddler, and that girl was already learning to keep silent. The man who built the cage. Benjamin Wood was a gambler, not in the small sense, in the sense that ruined dynasties. He had inherited the New York Daily News from his brother Fernando in 1860 and turned it into the loudest Democratic voice in Manhattan through the Civil War. He served 2 terms in Congress. He sat in the smoke-filled rooms where Tammany decided who would be sheriff, who would be hanged, and who would walk away from a courthouse with the keys to the city. By the 1870s, Benjamin Wood was worth several $1 million on paper. He lost most of it at the faro tables. Ida watched him do it. She watched him lose $40,000 in a single night at a gambling house on Broadway. She watched him return at dawn and request breakfast as though nothing had happened. She watched him pawn her jewelry to cover his markers and then replace the jewelry the following week as though she would never notice. She did notice. She noticed everything. And so, sometime in the early years of their marriage, Ida Wood made an agreement with her husband. The terms of that agreement, preserved later in handwritten notes found in room 552, were these. Benjamin would sign over to her 1/2 of every dollar he won. In exchange, she would never question his gambling. She would never weep. She would never plead. She would manage the household, host the parties, and keep the books. Benjamin agreed. Benjamin always agreed. Over the next 3 decades, Ida Wood became one of the shrewdest private financiers in Manhattan. She bought railroad bonds. She bought Union Pacific stock. She bought New York City real estate. She kept her own ledgers in a small leather book she carried in her sleeve. By 1900, when Benjamin Wood died on February 21 at the age of 79, his personal estate was nearly insolvent. The Daily News was sold. The mansion was mortgaged. The senators no longer came to dinner. But Ida Wood was rich, quietly, privately, ruthlessly rich. She had learned from her husband the only lesson that mattered in the Gilded Age. Wealth was not a thing you possessed. Wealth was a thing you defended, and the only person who would defend it for you was yourself. Benjamin Wood had given his wife a name, a position, and a child. He had also given her a permanent education in the fragility of fortune. He had shown her how quickly $1 million could vanish across a card table while a man smiled and ordered more brandy. She never forgot. She never recovered. There was a daughter. Her name was Emma. The official story, told and retold for 60 years, was that Emma was born to Ida and Benjamin Wood shortly after their marriage. The unofficial story, uncovered in the surrogate's court hearings of 1937, was that Emma had been born in 1857, 10 years before the marriage, and was the daughter of Ida's youngest sister, Mary Walsh. Ida had taken the infant from Massachusetts, crossed the river into Manhattan, and presented her to Benjamin Wood as her own. Benjamin, who married Ida 10 years later, accepted the child without question. Whether he ever knew the truth has never been established. Emma was raised inside the cage her mother had built. She was tutored at home. She was permitted no friends outside the immediate family. She wore the gowns of a Fifth Avenue heiress and the loneliness of a cloistered nun. She was forbidden to marry. She was forbidden to travel. She was forbidden to inherit anything in her own name. Every dollar that belonged to Emma was held in trust by her mother. Every suitor who approached the Wood household was turned away by Ida personally. There were several. There is record of at least 3. The most serious was a young Italian count named Carlo, who appeared in the late 1880s when Emma was 30. He wrote her letters. She wrote back. The letters were intercepted. Ida burned them in the parlor fireplace and forbade Emma to mention his name again. Carlo returned to Florence. Emma never married. Ida's sister Mary, the biological mother of Emma, lived with them in the household as a kind of permanent companion, an unmarried aunt who slept in a small room at the back of the house and was never introduced to dinner guests. Mary, who had grown up in the slums of Massachusetts with Ida, had agreed to the arrangement decades earlier and never spoke of it again. She would follow her sister into room 552 in 1907 and die there almost without speaking in 1931. This was the household Ida Wood ruled: a daughter who was a niece, a sister who was a ghost, a husband who was a gambler, a mansion full of senators and generals who came to dine and never noticed that none of the women in the family ever laughed aloud. The lessons Ida taught Emma were simple. Trust no man, trust no bank, trust no servant. Keep your money on your body, keep your past in a locked drawer. Speak softly, smile only when watched. The world is a knife, and it is always sharpening. Emma learned. She would die at 71, having never spent a single night outside her mother's company. The moment she almost escaped, there was one moment. The year was 1869. Ida was 31. She had been Mrs. Benjamin Wood for 2 years. She was carrying a child, her only natural child, a girl she would name Ida Wood after herself. The pregnancy was difficult. The child was born in late 1870. The child died within months, before her first birthday, of a fever the family physician was unable to name. In the months after the death of her infant daughter, Ida Wood disappeared from Manhattan. There is no society column mention of her between February and August of 1871. The Wood mansion was reported closed. Benjamin attended his congressional sessions alone. When asked, he said his wife was traveling for her health. She was not traveling for her health. She had returned to Malden, Massachusetts. For the first and only time in her adult life, Ida Wood went home. She visited the small frame house where she had been born Ellen Walsh 30, 3 years earlier. She saw her aging mother Anne, who still spoke with the accent of Dublin. She saw her surviving siblings, including one brother who worked in a mill and a sister who had become a domestic servant. She brought money. She brought silk dresses she would never wear again. She sat in a kitchen she had not entered since she was 19 and ate boiled potatoes from a tin plate. What happened in that kitchen was never recorded. But something broke. Or something refused to break. She had a choice. She had the wealth of Benjamin Wood. She had the legal standing to leave him. Divorce in 1871 was rare but not impossible, and Ida had grounds: his gambling, his infidelities, his debts. She had the option to remain in Malden, to reclaim the name Ellen Walsh, to mourn her dead infant among her own blood, to be poor and ordinary and free. She chose to return. We will never know why. The court records suggest pride. The letters suggest shame. The biography written in 1965 by Joseph A. Cox, the lawyer who eventually unraveled her secret, suggests something colder. She had built Ida Mayfield too well. She had inhabited the role for 14 years. The Walsh family in Malden was a country she had renounced. Returning to it would have meant admitting that every dinner, every dance, every diamond pinned to her bodice had been a lie. It would have meant becoming again the daughter of a peddler. She boarded a train back to New York in August of 1871. She never saw Massachusetts again. Her mother died in 1875. Ida did not attend the funeral. Her brother died in 1884. Ida did not attend. Her surviving sister Mary, the one who had given her the child, came to Manhattan and joined the household. The others were erased, the cage closed. She had built it herself. She had locked it from the inside. She would not open it again for 60 years. In October of 1907, the Knickerbocker Trust Company collapsed. The panic of 1907 began with a failed attempt by two speculators, F. Augustus Heinze and Charles W. Morse, to corner the market in United Copper. When the scheme collapsed, runs began on the banks associated with them. By the third week of October, depositors were lining up on Wall Street in the rain, demanding their money in cash. J.P. Morgan personally locked the city's leading bankers in his library and refused to let them leave until they pledged collective funds to stop the contagion. The crisis lasted 3 weeks. Hundreds of small banks failed. Fortunes evaporated overnight. Ida Wood, 69 years old, the widow of Benjamin Wood for 7 years, had been watching. In the first week of November 1907, she walked into the Guarantee Trust Company at 28 Nassau Street and withdrew her entire account. The exact figure varies by source. The conservative estimate is $750,000. The higher estimate is $1 million, in cash, in gold certificates, and in bearer bonds. She carried the money out of the bank in a satchel. She walked the 8 blocks north without a guard. She returned to her residence and began packing. Within days, Ida Wood, her sister Mary Mayfield, and her daughter Emma Wood checked into the Herald Square Hotel at 33 West 35th Street in Manhattan. They took a modest 2-room suite on the 5th floor, room 552. The rate was $15 a week. They paid in cash. They brought their trunks, their gowns, their family papers, and the satchel. They never checked out. For the first decade, they were merely eccentric. Mary and Emma occasionally took short walks. Ida wrote letters to her lawyers. Hotel staff delivered meals to the door. The women dined on evaporated milk, crackers, coffee, bacon, eggs cooked on a small gas burner in the bathroom, and an occasional fish. Ida smoked Cuban cigars, a habit she had picked up from Benjamin and never abandoned. She read newspapers, which she never threw away. By the early 1920s, the eccentricity had become something else. The suite filled with newspapers stacked from floor to ceiling, old wrapping paper accumulated in corners, balls of used string, saved from grocery deliveries, filled drawers and shoe boxes. The trunks were never unpacked. The windows were never opened. The maids were forbidden to enter. Linens were exchanged once or twice a year, passed through a crack in the door. The bathroom became a kitchen. The kitchen, if there had been one, was forgotten. The smell of the suite, by the testimony of hotel staff later under oath, was indescribable. The money was hidden everywhere. In the mattresses sewn into the ticking, in the lining of old gowns hung in the closet, in the false bottoms of trunks, in oilcloth bundles tied with string, in an old crackerjack box stored under the bed, which contained, when finally opened in 1932, approximately $247,000 in cash. Ida wore a money belt strapped to her body at all times. She slept in it. She bathed in it on the rare occasions she bathed at all. She was worth, by conservative estimate, close to $1 million. She was living on less than $2 a day. This was not poverty. It was something stranger. It was the architecture of a woman who had decided that the only safe place for her fortune was on her own skin. in her own walls, behind her own locked door. The world had taken too much from her already. It would take nothing more. In the years Ida Wood sat in room 552, the world outside her door rebuilt itself entirely. The Titanic sank in 1912, she did not know. The Great War began in 1914 and ended in 1918, taking with it the entire social order she had performed in. She did not know. The 18th Amendment passed in 1919. Prohibition began. Speakeasies opened on every block of Midtown. She did not know. Women received the vote in 1920. She did not know. The Wall Street boom of the 1920s made and broke fortunes far larger than hers. She did not know. Charles Lindbergh flew the Atlantic in 1927. She did not know. The stock market collapsed on October 29, 1929, ending the world her husband had helped create. She did not know. Outside her door on 35th Street, the Herald Square neighborhood transformed. Macy's expanded. The old Herald newspaper building was demolished in 1921. The elevated railroad above 6th Avenue thundered past her window. Automobiles replaced carriages. Electric lights replaced gas. The Empire State Building rose to the south, finished in 1931, becoming the tallest structure on Earth. Ida Wood, who had once been escorted to dinner by senators, sat in a darkened room a few blocks away and ate crackers from a tin. She was, in those years, a kind of fossil, the last living widow of a Civil War congressman. The last person in Manhattan who had personally known Mary Todd Lincoln, whom she claimed to have visited at the White House in 1862. The last person who remembered when Madison Square was the center of fashionable New York and when Fifth Avenue ended at 59th Street. She remembered General Grant as a young officer. She remembered Edwin Booth on stage at the Winter Garden Theater. She remembered the draft riots of 1863, when the Irish immigrants from her own forsaken Massachusetts childhood burned Manhattan for 3 days while she watched from a window in safety. She remembered everything. She told no one. Her sister Mary grew old beside her in absolute silence, the two of them passing decades in the same 2 rooms without ever, by any record, speaking of their childhood. Emma grew old, too, never marrying, never working, never traveling, dying without ever having lived. The 3 women aged together inside a single sealed chamber, while America became unrecognizable beyond the door. If this story is reaching something in you, share it with someone who needs to understand what inherited wealth without freedom actually looks like. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is the moment, because what comes next is the part most historians refuse to say out loud. In 1928, Emma Wood became ill. She was 71 years old. She had not seen a physician in over 20 years. She had not been outside the suite in nearly that long. When her mother finally permitted hotel staff to summon a doctor, the doctor took one look at the suite and ordered Emma to a hospital immediately. She was carried out on a stretcher. She died within days. The cause of death was given as a combination of malnutrition, infection, and untreated kidney failure. She had not been seen in daylight in 21 years. Ida Wood, 90 years old, did not attend the funeral. She did not leave room 552. She arranged for Emma's burial by mail and continued her existence as though the death of her daughter had merely been an interruption. 2 years later, in early 1931, her sister Mary fell critically ill. Mary, who had been the silent companion of 7 decades, who had given Ida the daughter Ida had taken as her own, who had followed Ida from Massachusetts to Manhattan to Herald Square, lay dying on a small cot in the second room of the suite. Ida did not call a doctor. For days, perhaps weeks, Ida Wood lived in 2 rooms with her dying sister and refused to summon help. She gave Mary water, she gave Mary crackers, she gave Mary nothing else. Hotel staff, alerted by the silence, finally knocked on the door in March of 1931. Ida cracked the door open. She told them her sister was unwell. She told them she required assistance. For the first time in 24 years, she permitted strangers to enter. What they found inside room 52 has been described in newspaper accounts, court testimony, and the memoir of Joseph A. Cox. The 2 rooms were piled to the ceiling with refuse, newspapers from every year between 1907 and 1931, empty cracker boxes, used string, yellowed gift wrapping, wooden crates, trunks containing silk gowns rotted into dust, a grand piano in one corner, untouched, covered in 2 decades of grime. On a small cot lay Mary Mayfield Walsh, 90 years old, emaciated, unconscious, dying. Beside her, in a soiled white nightgown, sat Ida Mayfield Wood, 93 years old, 4 feet 8 inches tall, weighing perhaps 70 pounds, her hair white and uncut for years, her teeth gone, her eyes alert and afraid. She was wearing a money belt under her nightgown. Inside the belt was nearly $500,000 in cash. Mary was taken to a hospital and died within hours. Ida refused to leave the suite. A nephew named Otis Wood, the son of Benjamin's brother Fernando, was located. He petitioned the New York Supreme Court for guardianship of his elderly aunt. The petition was granted. Lawyers were assigned. Nurses were hired. Ida Wood was bathed for the first time in over a decade. She was fed real food. She was placed in a chair by a window she had not looked out of since Theodore Roosevelt was president. She lived another year. She died on March 12, 1932, of pneumonia at the age of 94. She died in room 552. She had outlived every person who had ever known her secret, she thought. The headline in the New York Times on March 13, 1932, read, "Mrs. Ida Wood dies at 93 of pneumonia. Recluse hid $1 million in her room. Knit the inventory of room 552 took weeks. Court-appointed appraisers, accompanied by police officers and locksmiths, entered the suite and began the methodical excavation of 24 years of accumulated existence. They worked in protective masks. They worked slowly. They knew that anywhere, in anything, money might be hidden. They were correct. In an old crackerjack box beneath the bed, they found $247,200 in cash, neatly bundled. In a shoebox in the closet, they found another small fortune in gold certificates. In the mattresses, sewn into the ticking, they found $747,200 in cash. In oilcloth bundles tied with string, they found bonds valued at $175,000, much of it Union Pacific Railroad stock. In a wrapped package in a trunk, they found a diamond necklace once owned by Empress Eugenie of France, valued at $40,000. They found jewelry worth approximately $75,000 in total. They found letters from Mary Todd Lincoln. They found photographs of Benjamin Wood. They found a baptismal certificate hidden under the lining of a drawer for a child named Ellen Walsh, baptized in County Clare, Ireland, daughter of Thomas Walsh and Anne Crawford. The total estate, when finally appraised in 1937, came to $877,598. In Depression dollars, in the second worst year of American economic collapse since the founding of the Republic, the recluse of Herald Square had hoarded a fortune equivalent today to nearly $20 million. Smithsonian the newspapers descended. Photographers were permitted briefly into the suite before it was sealed by the court. The images that survive show a room out of a nightmare, a canopy bed buried in newspapers, a chandelier black with dust, a vanity mirror cracked and yellowed, a small framed photograph of a young woman in a white dress, the face of Ida Mayfield in 1867, the year she had become Mrs. Benjamin Wood. The photograph was inscribed in her own handwriting. It read Ida, the belle of New Orleans. The judge assigned to the estate was Surrogate James A. Foley of the New York County Surrogates Court. The lawyer assigned to investigate Ida Wood's true identity on behalf of the court was a young attorney named Joseph A. Cox. Cox would spend the next 5 years of his life unraveling her. What he found, he would later write, was not a woman. It was a fortress with a corpse inside. Within weeks of her death, the claimants began to arrive. By the end of 1932, more than 100 people had filed claims on the estate of Ida Mayfield Wood. By 1935, the number had climbed past 600. By the time Surrogate Foley issued his final ruling in September of 1937, more than 1,000 individuals had filed formal kinship claims in the New York Surrogates Court. They came from Louisiana, claiming descent from the Mayfield sugar planters. They came from Mississippi, claiming cousinage. They came from Virginia, from Texas, from California, from England, from France. Each presented documents, each presented family Bibles, each presented sworn affidavits. Each was lying. The Mayfield family of New Orleans did not exist. Henry Mayfield, the sugar planter, the father Ida had invented in 1857, had never been born. There were no plantations, there were no relations. The entire Southern aristocracy from which Ida Wood had claimed descent was a fiction constructed by a 19-year-old Irish girl in a Manhattan boarding house 75 years earlier. Joseph A. Cox, working night and day, traced the truth. He found in the rubble of room 552 the small notebook in Ida's own handwriting. In it, she had written the address of a small frame house in Malden, Massachusetts. He traveled to Malden. He found the house. He found the parish records of the Walsh family. He found the baptismal certificate of Ellen Walsh, daughter of Thomas and Anne, born January 14, 1838. He found death certificates for her parents and most of her siblings. He found in a country churchyard in Ireland 10 living descendants of Ida's siblings, cousins who had never heard of the Wood fortune, who lived as farmers and shopkeepers in the same villages their ancestors had left a century before. On September 1, 1937, Surrogate James A. Foley issued his ruling. He declared that Ida Mayfield Wood had been born Ida Ellen Walsh of Malden, Massachusetts, daughter of Thomas Walsh, an Irish immigrant peddler, and Anne Crawford of Dublin. He disqualified 406 claimants who had based their petitions on the Mayfield identity. He awarded the estate to 10 verified Walsh descendants in Ireland. Each received between $55,000 and $87,000 after legal fees, a sum that transformed them from peasants into landowners overnight. The lawyers took their cut. Joseph A. Cox received a substantial fee and would later write the definitive book on the case, The Recluse of Herald Square, published in 1964. The court took its cut. The hotel kept her trunks for a small fortune in unpaid back rent claims. The diamond necklace of Empress Eugenie was auctioned. The grand piano was sold. The crackerjack box, the one beneath the bed, the one containing $247,000, was eventually catalogued and destroyed. The fortune Ida Wood had defended for 24 years with the ferocity of a soldier in a bunker was dismantled in 8 months by strangers who had never met her. Tell me in the comments, do you think she ever had a single day of peace? I want to know what you think. Subscribe if you have not already, and stay, because the ending of this story is the part that will stay with you. The Herald Square Hotel still stands at 33 West 35th Street. It has been renovated several times. Room 552 was gutted in the 1940s and rebuilt as part of a different room configuration. The plaster, the wallpaper, the floorboards Ida Wood walked on for 24 years are gone. If you walk past the building today, you will see a brass nameplate and a glass door. You will not see her. No one will. She is buried in Trinity Cemetery on West 153rd Street in Manhattan beside Benjamin Wood. Her gravestone reads Ida Mayfield Wood. The court ruling of 1937, declaring her real name to have been Ellen Walsh, was not engraved. The lie outlasted her. Consider what she actually possessed at the end. She possessed $877,000. She did not possess a daughter because Emma was her niece and had died 70 years a prisoner. She did not possess a sister because Mary had been a co-conspirator in a forgery that had cost both of them their identities. She did not possess a name because the name on her tombstone was invented and the name on her birth certificate was forgotten. She did not possess a home because room 552 was a hotel suite she had paid weekly rent on for 24 years. She did not possess a country because the South she claimed had never been hers and the Ireland of her parents she had renounced at 19. She did not possess a body because she had refused to bathe it, feed it, or let it walk in sunlight for over 2 decades. She did not possess a memory anyone would carry forward because every person who had loved her was dead and every person who knew her secret had died first. She possessed cash. In a Cracker Jack box. Under a bed. In a hotel. The Cracker Jack box itself, the small cardboard container of a children's snack first marketed in Chicago in 1896, is the object that crystallizes her entire life. She had been raised on hunger. She had married into wealth. She had defended that wealth against gamblers, against banks, against panics, against time itself. And the safest place she could find for it, in the end, was inside a 5-cent box of caramel popcorn purchased on a Manhattan street corner sometime in the 1920s. The empty box outlasted her. The money inside outlasted her. The story outlasted her. But the girl named Ellen Walsh, the daughter of a peddler from Malden, the child of Irish immigrants who had crossed the ocean for a better life, did not outlast her. That girl had been buried at 19 in a Manhattan boarding house under the name Ida Mayfield. She was never resurrected. Here is the question she leaves you with. If you spent your entire life protecting a fortune no one knew you had, in a room no one was allowed to enter, inside an identity no one could verify, were you ever actually alive? Or were you simply the keeper of an empty box that everyone, in the end, mistook for a treasure? Ida Mayfield Wood died on March 12, 1932. Ellen Walsh, the girl she might have been, died sometime in the spring of 1857 in a letter she wrote to a married politician she had never met. She was 19 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her, and she chose the cage. She chose it again every day for 75 years. The candle gutters. The room is silent. The Cracker Jack box waits beneath the bed for someone, at last, to lift the lid.